Hello.
Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Give everyone a chance to log on. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Missouri Public Transit Association series webinar on last mile connectivity for Missourians. My name is Travis Wood. I'm the Senior Program Director at MPTA, and our MPTA provider members provide more than 47 million rides every day in Missouri and employ thousands in communities across the state. I'd like to welcome those MPTA board members who are joining us this morning, and thank you to all of our members and stakeholders who help move transit forward every day across the state. Our goal with today's discussion is to provide a forum for sharing the results of a MoDOT Commission study exploring first last mile connectivity in Missouri and look at next steps for the state to continue to provide links between fixed route transit service and commuters' origins and destinations. So to kick things off, we'll have introductory remarks from each of our panelists, and then we'll open things up, discussion and Q&A from our attendees, as well as questions that have been shared with us ahead of time. As a reminder, you can place your questions in the chat box or the Q&A tab at any time as we're going along today. And let's welcome our panel. We have Alvaro Villagran, Director of Federal Programs at the Shared Use Mobility Center. We have Luba Guzay, Director at Via Strategies, and Christy Evers, Administrator of Transit at the Missouri Department of Transportation. So let's jump right in, and we'll have Alvaro kick us off to share the results of this study. And I will get your slides up right now.
Thank you very much, Travis. And while you do that, I want to, first of all, thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks, Missouri Public Transit Association for the invite to spread the good work that we have produced through this MoDOT sponsored and funded research project. We're very excited when we got the notice and that this opportunity was available, and we celebrate the fact that MoDOT was interested in exploring more this very timely research topic that is so keen to many people around the country. Next slide, please. So very quickly regarding this presentation, I'm going to be teaming here with my colleague Luba Guzay from VIA, telling you more about what we found through our research project. Just a quick disclaimer that the opinions and findings here are not expressing the opinions of MoDOT. So this is part of the research team findings and opinions. And this report is already available online. This is at MoDOT's website. I provided here a shorter link to it, but it is publicly available now, so you will be able to dig into more details at your own pace after this webinar. Next slide, please. So just to introduce quickly the concept of first last mile, for those of you who are not familiar, the concept refers to a situation where traveler cannot use, access, or connect to transit due to the lack of connectivity to the first last mile, and there could be many miles as well, either to the destination or connecting to existing transit service. In other cases, first last mile could be a temporal issue where like the connection is related to connecting to transit, at hours where transit either hasn't started working yet or has stopped at the end of the day. And this is an issue that has been affecting cities, counties, transit agencies in rural contexts, suburban and urban as well. So this is an important tool to bring people back to transit, to make transit more convenient and impactful for people to access destinations. And in this particular project, we focus on access to workplaces and workforce related. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk you quickly through the research activities we conducted for this study, and then we're going to be sharing some of the results. So the activities included, we did a scan of cases around the country, looking at different modes of transportation that are addressing first last mile issues. We cover 15 in-depth case studies with transit agencies, non-for-profit organizations, and private operators doing different type of first last mile. Then we conducted a few interviews, to get more in-depth information. And then we moved to getting a little bit more of the state of the art here in Missouri. We interviewed two transportation providers. We hosted a virtual forum with multiple stakeholders just to get a little bit more perspective. And then we conducted an analysis of existing conditions, and you'll be hearing some details in a second. And we presented a version of this study last year at the Missouri Public Transit Association conference in September. Next slide, please. So for the case studies here, you have a map just to give you a sense of the geographic distribution. We kind of cover, again, I mentioned different modes, different type of agencies or mobility providers. And we also try to bring in some of Midwest case studies just to make it feel a little bit closer to home. Next slide, please. For the virtual forum, it was very, very, very rich conversation. So I'm just presenting here a few, takeaways, large picture, but very interesting to hear the different, challenges that agencies have been encountering in different contexts. But a few trends seems to be common to many of them. One is a spatial mismatch. So again, thinking about accessing to jobs, the pandemic definitely had an impact on all this. But how, that relationship between whether people are going, work related destinations and how transit can either follow or be proactive in serving transportation for people needed to access those destinations. Another one was in community transportation needs assessments, and this a little bit the transit agencies are very familiar with their riders and their the communities they serve, but there's still a little bit of a gap in understanding, what are need for transportation. Sometimes people who cannot access information or express their voices, and that's an area that has a lot of potential to grow. And then we also hear some challenges in terms of coordination, policy, and funding limitations between agencies. Sometimes, there's geographic overlap, but there's lack of coordination. Sometimes an agency wants to provide service somewhere, but lack of the funds or the possibility to serve that based on statutory or policy context. So that was another interesting limitation in coordinating different type of services to ensure that seamless transition from one mode or one service to another can happen. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it now to Luba to tell us more about existing condition analysis for this study.
Great. Thank you, Alvaro. So my team conducted the existing conditions analysis, and this is a high-level overview. Similarly to a lot of what Alvaro discussed, there was a lot of rich content that was produced as part of the study, and I'm only going to cover a few interesting tidbits to give you a taste of what's in the final report. So we looked at 3 elements of existing conditions. The first was a transit network assessment. So we looked at all of the major cities, taking a look at primarily their fixed route networks, but also looking at regional connectivity, existing on-demand services, basically assessing the conditions into which a potential first mile, last mile service could connect into. We also looked at commute patterns across the state and conducted demographic analysis to understand the distributions of demographics that are known to ride transit at higher rates. We looked at all three of those elements, and based on those, we developed some commute typologies, and I'll walk through this in a few slides. Next slide, please. So one of the elements we looked at was, this is an overlay of population. So the red color you see underneath on this map is population. This is St. Louis. And so you can see the darker the red, basically the denser the area. And that's overlaid with the existing fixed route transit system. And the fixed route transit is colored based on the frequency of service. So anything red are lines that run every 15 minutes or more frequently. Blue is 15 to 30 minutes, green 30 to 60, etc. And you can see here that the highest density areas are overlaid with fixed route with quite a high degree of coverage. And in fact, such a high degree of coverage that you can barely see the density mapping underneath it. And of course, as you get more into the peripheries of the city, the less and less transit coverage you have. And so that first mile, last mile connectivity really makes a lot of sense sort of in the peripheries of a city like this. And indeed, they already have an existing microtransit service that provides some of that connectivity in areas that don't make sense for fixed route coverage. So looking at maps like this really helps us understand, would you need to cover the central parts of a city, the more peripheral edges, or perhaps some combination of the two. Next slide, please. We also looked at more mid-sized cities, and Jefferson City is a great example of this. This is a map of the existing fixed routes run by JeffTran, and you can see that they're all, I believe their frequency is something along the lines of every 40 minutes. And this is a really interesting flag for a city that would really benefit from a first mile, last mile connection. You can see there's large areas that have some population, but it's pretty low density and with little to no fixed route coverage. So it would be a really great opportunity for a transit service. And in fact, since we've completed the study, JeffTran has gone out to procure for a microtransit service. Microtransit is just one of the many, many types of first mile, last mile connections that we explored. But it is something that this city in particular is also pursuing. Next slide, please. Oats Transit was a really interesting element of what we looked at. So we looked at not only at fixed routes, but just at broader connectivity across the state. And something that we saw was that really there's not a great deal of frequent connectivity that is provided. And large parts of the state are really only covered by providers that where you have to call and reserve in advance. So Oats has a really fantastic service, a true lifeline in parts of the state that don't have other services, but the service just isn't frequent enough and pre-scheduled enough in order for a first mile, last mile service to connect into. So understanding the existence of these types of services was really helpful, as well as understanding the elements of the way in which they operate that make them a good or perhaps less good candidate for a first mile, last mile connection. Next slide, please. We also looked at statistics related to commute patterns. You can see that overall, the vast majority of residents in the state drive alone to work. And an additional, 7 to 10% carpool. So that means, and then anywhere from 6 to 15% work from home. So that leaves just a small sliver of folks that are using public transportation, walking, bicycling, or cycling in order to get to their place of employment. We do see that in a place like St. Louis, right? Public transportation is 6% of the total commute pattern, the greatest of any of the cities in the state. And that really shows us that having more access to better transit encourages folks to stop using their single occupancy vehicles, get onto a convenient and efficient transit system. And so really, our recommendations not only provided guidance around first mile, last mile, but also suggestions for broader, the kind of connectivity that would be required for first mile, last mile, and therefore result in a better overall public transit system that could lead to conversion from folks using single occupancy vehicles and towards public transit more broadly. Next slide, please. Great. So we took all of that information and much, much more and developed some commute typologies. The idea here was that, looking statewide is a complex endeavor. It is not a homogeneous state. There's many very rural areas, some urban areas, and a good mix of suburban areas. And we wanted to not just go through every single location and say, this is what you need in this specific location, but provide a framework that decision makers could use based on the characteristics of their current municipality, maybe looking at different communities in different ways, and start thinking about what kind of first mile, last mile connectivity could be appropriate based on the different elements that already exist in a given area. So across the top here, there's three different distinctions. There's urban, suburban, and rural. Urban areas, basically a high density, high concentration of residents. Suburban, a little bit more dispersed. Rural areas, maybe small towns or really sprinkling of homes among, sort of agricultural land. And then on the left, there's two types of employment patterns. There's concentrated employment and dispersed employment. The idea here being that in concentrated employment, folks are traveling really towards a dense core area, whereas with dispersed employment, there's really not a single transit pattern that is generated by the way that employment is structured. So for example, if you have an urban area with concentrated employment, that's a great hotbed for excellent public transit. If you have a rural area with concentrated employment, you may still have a good opportunity for public transit because you're getting folks perhaps along a single travel corridor, all going to a single location. Something like a suburban area with dispersed employment may have fewer existing transit services, perhaps lower ridership, lower propensity for ridership, and may be harder to plug a first mile, last mile service into because of a likely lack of existing transit connections. And back to you, Alvaro.
Thank you, Luba. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna walk you through the findings and recommendations included in this report. Again, I'm gonna provide a overview, and more details are included in the report itself. So one of the findings that we presented is that first last mile transportation is a workforce development opportunity. So again, the origin for this study was a result of conversations with a Missouri task force looking at and access to employment, and this importance of providing that first last mile as a way of ensuring that people can not only reach their destinations but also access the transit service that exists in order to do so. So the first recommendation involves developing interagency partnerships that goes in different directions. It could be whether between cities and transit agencies, or between different transit agencies, or even with workforce development agencies. And that's the second part, where a better understanding of what are the workforce related challenges to access these destinations, and how transit can serve to fill those gaps related to first last mile connections, which again, they could be geographic in terms of distances or spaces, but they can also be temporal, right? Like times in the day where transit is less frequent, or transit service is not provided, and that's another good space for first last mile transportation. And third, night shifts are a typical example for these type of programs. Next slide. Another finding is that implementing first last mile solutions require a thorough understanding of demographic, economic, and geographic context. This is once again where there is no one size fits all, or like one solution that accommodates each and all communities. So the first part is just to think about what are the strengths of your transit service, the core, the connection. Again, this, if you think about first last mile connection, it has to be connected to an existing service, and that service, the state and what it needs to be prioritized in terms of investments and transit service planning has to come first, and then first last mile conversations can plug into that core transit service. In order to do that, also it's important to evaluate and understand what is the lay of the land in each community and figure out, how the service that you're thinking about, will interact best with existing service. Next slide, please. So third finding is that effective partnership building is integral to first last mile services and employment transportation. And this is an important part where the connection with employers and different type of organizations come into play. I'm going to provide more examples later in the conversation, but there's an important component in the recommendations looking at partnership with local employers. And I know, this is always challenging, but it's still a critical, component in targeting, especially when we think about workforce development and accessing, specific job destinations. That partnership with the employers is critical. And then the other recommendation is to explore partnership with a variety of organizations. Many times we tend to focus on large employers or the most obvious employer, and we know there's a little bit of an oversight of other trip generators, that also provide essential services, but not necessarily are the largest of the more sound, and but they also need for people to access those destinations, and it's important to create and explore those partnerships. Next slide, please. Um, Also find that, first last mile transportation services need community support to thrive. This is important both at the time of designing or, conceptualizing, what could be the best first last mile solutions for different communities. As well as when you move into an implementation phase and thinking about the target marketing and promotional campaign, like the informational component is very critical for the success of the first last mile. Many times it involves a behavioral change or involves like people need to change their traditional behavior patterns. So that's a recommendation for planning ahead of time for a marketing and promotional campaign. And also both in the design and implementation, seeking out for champions and that could support the project, as well as considering convening a mobility task force that could inform conception, implementation, and also, kind of following up and how to tweak and iterate the services just to make sure that they adapt and serve the community the best way possible. Next slide, please. Another finding that we encounter here is that there are significant gaps in knowledge about Missouri transportation needs and opportunities. This is one aspect of this is the need to understand what are transportation needs in general for communities, especially those who are non-existing transit riders or people whose situation transportation need have been changing over time. So it's important to get that community transportation needs assessment in place. And the second recommendation addresses the need to develop knowledge sharing resources for transportation providers. Many times, agencies simply, do not know about what could be possible, or though are not familiar with what other agencies and peers have been doing in other parts of the country, or simply, they see the need, they see the opportunity, but they don't know how to take this first step. So sometimes, just having that resource available and ready to go, like, hey, you have this idea, here's, what others have done about it, or this is how you can implement it. It's the difference between making it a reality or not. So that's an important thing, to develop at a state level as well. Next slide, please. The last finding, involves the state DOTs and how they can play a key role in supporting first last mile transportation initiatives. And this is a very promising avenue here in Missouri, but it has, have been seeing a lot of development also across the country. So it's not just the federal government that's been supporting some of the first last mile demonstration projects, pilots, or funding sources, but also state DOTs have become more and more involved in this process. Some of them, part of the recommendations that we provided here have been supporting feasibility studies, so focusing more on on that conceptual and idea development at the early stages. Others have established first as my connectivity grants, so that's a way to support the implementation. And then last but not least, there is this great opportunity to invest in statewide regional technology infrastructure that supports, this interaction, this coordination and integration between transit service and first last mile programs. And I'm gonna say very quickly about that that goes both technologies to operate and run this program, as well as informational. Many times, even the services can be in place, but that lack of coordination, lack of information could also be a barrier. So the technologies goes for the information to the customers, as well as the technologies that support the operations of the services. And that I'm gonna stop here with the findings and get it back to you, Travis.
All right, thanks so much, Alvaro and Luba. Now let's turn to Christy Evers with MoDOT to discuss how these results will be used going forward. And Christy, I will get your slides up now.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So Alvaro and Luba went into detail discussing the project research activities and results. I will be focused more on MoDOT's implementation strategies to the findings and recommendations of this first and last mile project. You can next slide. So as Alvaro said, our finding and recommendations, number one is first and last mile transportation is a workforce development opportunity. So those recommendations was, develop those interagency partnerships and connect with state and federal workforce development agencies. Next slide. So MoDOT's already been kind of involved in some of these already. So the first one is the Missouri Transportation Task Force. So that task force is made up of state departments, other transit-related partners, transit agencies, and within that task force, there is a subcommittee for state departments. And on that subcommittee, there's economic development, higher education, social services, mental health, veterans administration, and MoDOT. Within this committee, we share information on funding programs, we share resources, we discuss transportation challenges within each organization, really trying to figure out how to leverage those transportation funding that come into each one of those in efforts to braid that funding. The next one is a master plan on aging. There is, within that, there is subcommittees focusing on transportation and mobility. And in this subcommittee, we have developed 7 recommendations that will be presented here shortly to support transportation of seniors. But there's not only seniors, but this goes across all demographics of people that are needing transportation services. So one of them is continue to support and advocate for state investment in transportation infrastructure. So currently we have a MPTA program that has $5 million in it from the state that supports the transportation of seniors and individuals with disabilities. We want to continue to increase state public transit assistance. In 2022 and prior years, we are at 26 cents per capita in state investment. In 2024, that was increased to $1.89 per capita. So a huge increase, but we want to continue to advocate for that investment in public transit assistance. We're also recommending support the expansion of coordination among agency and transportation modes. So MoDOT and MPTA is working currently on a statewide mobility management initiative that will regionally place mobility managers across the state to coordinate transportation needs, utilizing all modes of transportation networks. Encourage innovation and flexible transit options, including but not limited to on-demand, same-day services, including rural communities. So within this, we want to promote and support existing MoDOT funded transit providers, intercity service, back one.
I bet.
Intercity services to connect other modes of transportation, the need to ensure services can get riders to services they need in other counties, even when their primary services of their current area do not cover it. We want to create more connections between different cities and towns throughout the state, expand microtransit for first and last mile connected to public transit, and support volunteer driver programs to fulfill those gaps. MPTA also, just to mention them, monthly we meet on a statewide, we meet statewide with public transit agencies, urban planning organizations, FTA, and other organizations such as AARP to align transportation initiatives, share resources, and discuss any transportation challenges and also our wins. FTA has a workforce development initiative. So this initiative provides resources and support to public transit agencies to recruit, retain, and train transit workers to ensure that transit industries have the workforce needed for the today and in the future. And over the last decade, FTA provided over $20 million to fund innovative workforce grants. And they also developing and retaining the transit workforce. This results in operational sustainability. So if we can retain our workforce and grow it, we can provide more transit service. And the last thing there is build partnerships at the regional, local level. So we are really active in our area planning commissions, the activities that they have going on. We meet monthly with these individuals, or monthly or quarterly. So we try to be very involved here at the DOT and identifying the transportation needs for their areas. Next slide. This is finding and recommendations number 2. So implementing first and last mile solutions that require a thorough understanding of demographic, economic, and geographic context. You can go to the next slide. So the implementation strategies on this. So in 2022, MPTA published the 2022 needs assessment study, which MoDOT was in partnership with them, which that study identified there were 39 million unmet trips across the state. So that project evaluated current transit service levels, identified areas where current service levels did not meet the existing demand for transit, and developed strategies to offer additional and more efficient transit service in the state. That needs assessment study that was done in 2022 is getting ready to be updated here pretty soon. So we hope to build and show that we met some of those unmet demand trips, but also the need for more investment in public transit. In 2024, East-West Gateway, in partnership with MoDOT, did a study for Blueprint for Arterials. This was a comprehensive framework that better aligns and defines our processes and for planning, designing, and implementing St. Louis regional arterials, which is just the type of road designs to carry high volumes of motorized traffic to elevate overall safety and be more inclusive of all users and needs on all modes of transportation. So including transit and other modes of multimodal transportation modes is important in that design and that planning and design phase of roadway projects. Intercity bus study. The last study conducted by MoDOT was over 10 years ago. So MoDOT will be issuing a request for proposal to conduct an intercity bus study in the coming months. This updated plan is to ensure that Missouri intercity bus needs are being met, describing the current state of our intercity bus service, identifying any kind of service gaps and needs, and implementation strategies for improving service, evaluating progress, and making interline connections with area transportation services. The city of Jefferson, somebody mentioned this, Alvaro Aluba, is getting ready to conduct a microtransit study. So this study will analyze existing fixed route transit service to determine more reliable and effective routes to enhance connection throughout the city. So our first and last mile will be part of that. Next slide. Number 3 was to create effective partnerships, to build is integral, to first and last mile services and employment transportation first last mile solution requires, again, a thorough understanding of the demographic, economic, and geographic context. So pursue partnerships with local employers, explore partnerships with a variety of organizations, and provide direct support to local transportation providers in partnership building. Next slide. So again, our strategies here, we want to create and expand on our State Department relationships that we already have in place. Our area planning organizations, these guys are critical. They know the needs in their area. So we need to, be more involved in what is going on in their areas and provide assistance as far as funding, to help them do studies and things like that so they can progress in building, transportation services in their area. As far as providing funding for transportation studies, so they have our transit agencies and our planning organizations have access to Section 5304 funds, where they can conduct, any kind of studies that will expand or enhance their transportation programs. So it's really critical that MoDOT area planning organizations and FTA technical assistance providers can assist local transportation providers with forming and managing partnerships and can convene interagency relationships to further help cities and transportation providers. Next slide. This was number 4. So first and last recommendation number 4, first and last mile transportation services needs community support to thrive. Oh my gosh, I can't talk this morning. So basically this is just a plan for a targeted marketing and promotion campaign and seek out those project champions that can support the project. Next slide. So again, our intercity bus study is going to be crucial here. In particular, we have a targeted area in this study that we will be looking at a Jefferson City Columbia Express bus route service. So in 2022, MoDOT conducted a survey to determine interest for this route with potential transit service between Jefferson City, Columbia downtown, Jefferson City Amtrak, Columbia Regional Airport, and intermediate points. So again, this intercity bus study will have an area of focus with this specific route. And hopefully in that study, identification of efficient route stops and funding opportunities will be identified to ensure its long-term sustainability. Again, our area planning organizations. So like I had mentioned before, we participate in area planning activities with monthly meetings. We assist with the updates of their various transportation plans. In July of 2024, a multimodal transportation advisory committee was implemented for each regional planning commission, where they either created a separate multimodal TAC, which is Transportation Advisory Committee, or they had a multimodal subcommittee to the existing TAC, or established a dedicated multimodal position on their existing TAC. So that was just implemented in July. It's progressing very well. We'll reevaluate that again in a few months to see how that's going. But really, that was just to make sure that multimodal transit specifically is, for me, is at the table when those conversations are happening, because at those area planning organizational meetings, your local city, county officials are there, and so they need to understand what the transportation needs are for their community. In addition, MoDOT continuously advocates for transit agencies to be involved in community planning at the local and state level. This allows them to engage in area community members, elected officials, advocate for involvement in area planning needs at the city and local level, and provides for the opportunity on how projects can affect their transportation services. Next slide. So this recommendation was, and we're pretty aware of this, that there are significant gaps in knowledge about the transportation needs and opportunities to close those gaps. So some of our, next slide, Travis. So some of the strategies, again, that I think will help provide knowledge and close the gaps that we're seeing is the update to our 2022 transit needs assessment study, our intercity bus study, which will definitely show where, since it's been, over 10 years ago, it will definitely show a need for new routes and things like that. Statewide mobility management program that I discussed, regionally placing mobility managers throughout the state, and those mobility managers becoming the expert at what transportation services offer there will definitely create a more efficient and effective transportation programs. And then also the City of Jefferson's microtransit study. So, I mean, each of these studies and programs will identify the needs in communities and an opportunity to educate those in communities the transportation options that can be utilized. All right, the last finding and recommendation is, you go to the next slide, Travis, is, what state DOTs can play, what role they have in supporting first and last mile initiatives. Next slide. Again, this goes back, I think we're doing a lot of these things and we got a lot of things in the work right now. Our 2022 update to our transit needs assessment study, again, our intercity bus, our statewide mobility management program, the City of Jefferson's microtransit study. And then also we're looking at conducting a phase 2 of this first and last mile study. Which is going to be identifying existing first and last mile services already occurring in the state, implementation of new areas of services, and also identifying funding to support it. I think that's it. Next slide, Travis. Yeah, so there's my contact information if you want to contact me outside of this webinar. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Christy, so much. And thanks, Alvaro and Luba, for your update on the study results. So let's get to the Q&A. I know that there's been some questions in the chat box and Q&A tab that I believe Alvaro and Luba have been answering, but keep those questions coming. One question we got was just in terms of, you did this study for the state of Missouri. How did the first last mile issues and status in our transportation network compare to other areas of the country that you looked at? And maybe piggybacking on that, what are some effective solutions that you've seen, implemented or moving forward, maybe with areas that could be considered, peer states?
That's a great question. I'm going to jump first. First of all, I think that there has been a lot of progress in different parts of the country, looking at different modes of transportation that can supply first last mile and different type of partnerships. And then in that sense, something that we find super interesting about this study and the case of Missouri is that there's a lot of room to growth. And there's a lot of room for people to take initiatives and explore and try different type of solutions. And whether they are new type of services, microtransit or micromobility services, there are partnerships in terms of as I mentioned with employers, but there is also coordinating with existing TNC programs, with medical transportation, and in some cases even with other type of transportation services related to specific work trip related. And so the first thing that we notice is that there is a lot of potential and room to grow here. And I think that part of the value of this study was to bring a little bit of like what is happening in other parts of the country, just to give people in Missouri a little bit of a flavor, a sense of what opportunities are still there to be explored. So kind of celebrating the fact that this the first stage of the study brings a little bit of that information to the table, so more of these studies can be conducted and services deployed. I'm gonna stop here for a second and see if Luba or Christy wanna jump in.
Yeah, I have just one more thing to add to that, which is I think first mile, last mile is an interesting moniker because it suggests that you're connecting into a specific type of system most of the time, right? There's a traditional way in which that term is used, which is really connecting to a fixed route system. I think in a lot of places in the state, there isn't necessarily a system that you're connecting into that's of that type. And what you actually need is an innovative set of transit elements that allow folks to connect but in a location that is, maybe medium density or low density. So I think it also really highlighted sort of the limitations of this study in a way, which is that I think there's broader transit need and potentially broader transit demand. And first mile, last mile is a piece of the puzzle, but there's many other pieces of the puzzle that can come together to provide quality transit service.
Yeah, and to add on to Luba there, she's exactly right. So a lot of Missouri is not the typical first last mile connectivity that you're thinking about. So I think doing a phase 2 of this project will help identify that. And then as we get success in areas of the state, I think we'll just keep building upon that to, create, find locations where we can either be innovative and create a not a different solution, whether that's van pooling, micro transit, micro mobility, something like that. But I think phase 2 of this project will really help with that. And I think also having a statewide mobility management program will identify those gaps and the actual type of service needed. So I think that will help as well.
Great. Yeah, and
Can
I
I
think,
jump in for?
oh yeah, go
What-
for it.
So from the Missouri Public Transit perspective, Association perspective, we think this study is really beneficial because it provides the necessary data. It talks, Luba, about the fact that we're not there yet, and it's not just a first mile gap, it's a much bigger gap in some areas for service and the needs for service. So we really appreciate your efforts, and this study is one of the reasons we decided to go back and do a reboot of the 2022 transit needs assessment study. Have we made inroads on those 39 million rides, or has that number increased to 50 million rides a year? What are we looking at so that we have the necessary data? And in the end, as Christy was talking about, we need more investment in public transit, and we need to be able to have state investment so we can go for more federal dollars. So thank you for that data. And I think you're right. It goes way beyond just the first last mile, but this study definitely underscored the need for additional services.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned, and one of the important things that Kim just touched on, is funding, whether it's for feasibility studies, for actually implementing projects. Christy, I think it's great. There's phase 2 moving forward, and that's exciting. Maybe you can touch on the timing of that in a minute, just so everyone knows that. And you talked about 5304 funds being available. I wonder if there's other ideas we have around funding studies or implementing projects going forward, and Alvaro and Luba, if there's some creative or interesting partnerships or funding streams that have been utilized elsewhere that maybe we can learn from here in Missouri.
I can jump quickly on this one. Funding is always a critical, component on any stage. And I'm gonna emphasize again, there's funding for planning and idea and concepts, development, as well as, identifying the implementation. There's also that distinction between pilot programs that have been funded versus, more permanent programs. We've seen a lot, the Shared Use Mobility Center is one of the Federal Transit Administration's technical assistance center. We have worked with a lot of agencies, developing the concept and then the implementation for the demonstration. And then the challenge is like, okay, how do we make this sustainable over time? So what I'm trying to point out here is that there are different funding streams for different stages of the program, right? So at least, thinking about that, and 5304, it's an easy and ready to go, planning grant that could be used for feasibility studies in addition to what MoDOT can provide directly. I'm gonna say very quickly in terms of other potential funding. I know that partnering with, sometimes employer has been challenging, that's still a big one. But on the medical transportation, there's, a growing understanding of how, transportation plays a critical role in accessing, medical services. And this is especially very true in rural areas. So how do we establish, the partnership, the programs that ensure that people can still access those services? It's critical. So those conversations about funding coming from medical side, it's important. I'm going to mention very quickly, we have seen a very creative use of EPA funds, Environmental Protection Agency, carbon reduction programs, community challenge. A few communities have say, hey, there's a transportation problem. This is related to environmental conditions. So just starting to think a little bit also outside the box of the typical DOT, whether it's a federal level, state level, or municipal level, and say, okay, transportation is a problem, and transit is a service that is benefiting the communities in a broader space. So how to look and apply for funding that is not just the traditional transportation funds that we look at.
Yeah, I can say 2 points here. The first of which is that, transportation, the framing of transportation can be important to what funding you offer and what funding a city is able to secure. So framing transit as a workforce development program, right? I think a lot of the time folks might shy away from saying, oh, I'm going to fund transit, but oh, you're going to fund workforce development. Of course we want that, right? So I think understanding the role that transit is playing and not only seeing it as transit, but as part of a larger system and what parts of that larger system you might be willing to fund, or voters might be willing to fund, can be an important element of getting local funding. Most transit is funded locally, or the vast majority of transit funding is local. And a lot of the time, cities and smaller communities have trouble with the operating funding, right? You might say, okay, we're going to get a grant, we're going to stand up a transit system, or we're going to stand up a specific type of transit program, but then you need sustainable funding year over year, specifically for operations. And so I think from the state perspective, being able to either offer support, whether it's like technical support to get federal funding or even statewide funding for operations, can be really helpful to those smaller communities who maybe have trouble, who might be hesitant to stand up a program because they're not sure about how they're going to make it sustainable, 5-10 years into the future.
So I just want to add 2 points on there. So on the federal side, I think it's super important, those interagency partnerships, being able to identify that transportation funding, because they all get it. We just got to figure out how we can create that funding together and utilize it for transportation services. The second part on the local side, like Luba was saying, many local cities, counties, they don't have the resources for that match. But again, on the same side, I think there's a disconnect in knowledge on what transit services can bring to their communities. It's economic development, it's shopping, it's all of that. So them understanding at that local level what transit brings to them, that value is super important in getting that investment at the local level, and also stemming up from there. If at a local level people are engaging in how transit affects their community and things like that, they bring that to the state level, which then equates to more state investment. And I think we can do that successfully with, our transit agencies do an awesome job at talking with their state and local representatives, but having like our new multimodal tax where they're at the table when those planning conversations are happening, when those needs are being discussed, having them at the table brings, to the forefront what how transportation serves their communities and the importance of it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Alvaro and Luba, you touched on, the importance of, having first last mile and these agencies and community groups kind of involved in the decision-making processes and planning. And I know we had a question about land use, I think, that was in the chat. And while you maybe didn't dive deeply into that, I do think it's important that transit agencies, advocacy groups are part of those discussions, because that will just help the first last mile issues. One thing that we did get a question on was kind of discussing microtransit in comparison to maybe more expansive fixed route transit projects. And I wonder in your studies of other areas, microtransit's obviously one of the more popular solutions to this problem that comes up time and time again. In what ways have you seen microtransit projects be successful versus maybe not successful? What are some of the factors there about whether, you can have the ridership to make that work?
I'm happy to talk about this a little bit. I think microtransit is most successful when, like you're saying, there's a meaningful ridership base there, right? So the zone microtransit, for those who might not be aware, it's a zone-based system, right? So instead of having fixed routes and stops, you have a zone and you request a ride and vehicles travel in that zone. Really important to have a zone that covers basically a sufficient number of residents and points of interest for folks to travel to. We find that even in a microtransit service that's meant for primarily employment connectivity, that a significant portion of the rides are folks just traveling within that community for groceries, to access basic amenities, to access services, maybe a local hospital, a clinic, an employment office, et cetera. So making sure that the zone, is an area within which there are reasons to travel and a sufficient number of folks who are willing to do that travel. So I think first is just selecting that geography appropriately. The second I would say is awareness and marketing of the service. So making sure that folks are aware that it exists, working with community groups, working with employers, making sure that those, again, who may want to access that service know that it exists and understand how to ride it. We've done studies where there might be a big Hispanic population and they say, the service is free and I'm really skeptical of a free service and I've never ridden it and no one I know rides it. And so, why would I get on, right? And so you work with a local community group, you might maybe work with a local center, get a group of folks to actually ride the service, try it out, get them on it. And then it becomes part of the community and how it operates there. I think the final thing is making sure that the service is easy to use and easy to understand. So that's everything from making sure that you have a call-in option for seniors, making sure you have an app that really works, making sure the drivers understand how the service works and can talk to folks about it, et cetera. So really making it something that, if you're interested in riding it, you could easily understand the role it plays, and being able to actually access it. I think it's a really effective solution for first mile, last mile. But I also think that it is most effective when it is both used for that and also, like I said, sort of for a general transit purpose. Alvaro, happy to.
I'm gonna jump very, very quickly. I know that we're running out of time. Three concepts to keep in mind. Purpose. I mean, it's successful if you know what you're trying to accomplish. So it's not a magic solution like investing in understanding what this service is intended for. It's critical to start with. The second one would be the scale, and then how either you do zones or but right sizing, the type of service. The third one, it's more important, I think, it's the iteration component. It's not like you put together first as my service and that's it. You solve the problem. It is an iteration. I'm just think about for fixed route transit, agencies will go through their schedules, on regular basis. They make adjustments, the routing to the scheduling. So the same thing happened with first last mile. So just think about that and how you adapt and listen to the different needs and how you adapt along the way.
So one more quick question here before I get some final thoughts. I had questions about the workforce development angle, and I think that's incredibly important. We obviously jobs are, I think, becoming more disparate in terms of not concentrated maybe in city centers or town centers, and it's becoming more difficult to get people who are job candidates to interviews or to jobs. What have you seen, I guess, from other regions in terms of getting buy-in from some of those employers and workforce centers? I know in some of the interviews you did with transit agencies here in Missouri, there's difficulty in setting up programs specifically to some of those workforce centers because of that lack of maybe buy-in or willing to subsidize some of those rides from some of those employers?
Gonna jump very quickly here in terms of thinking about who is an employer, right? Like, and we tend to think about the large employer or the more sound. I'm gonna bring quickly a couple of examples of a project we supported. One is with DART in Delaware. One of the key employers was a state prison, and in a rural area, transit hasn't conceived that as a key origin destination, trip generator. And then through this, project, they realized that there was a lot of demand, just people working there, people visiting, just thinking critically about, your local economy and who is, an employer and whether they contribute financially or not to the service. That's a different question. But like, where are the origin and destination, trips that you may not, be more aware of. And similarly, in terms of the user perspective, another example was with Cecil County in Maryland, also a rural transit provider. They were working with people, recovering from drug abuse, and people that cannot, drive. They don't have a driver license, or they have that ability. And there were a lot of, back to access job interviews, job opportunities. They were providing the service with the needs of that population in mind. So just think about, who are, when we think workforce development, get a better understanding of who are employers in your area, and, the potential needs for job opportunities.
All right. Christy, Luba, anything to add to that? All right. Well, I know we've hit the time. We could talk all day, but I would love for each of you to kind of just give your last takeaway. What do you think some of the most important findings are, the most important next steps? What would you like to see happen going forward? Christy, I'll start with you.
Okay, so I think this first and last mile project really, like Kim said, just brought even more awareness on the gaps in transportation services across the entire state, especially in rural. So I really think focusing on continuing to build those partnerships, at the regional, local level, making those people in those communities understand what transit service can bring to their communities. And then also, identifying, the studies that we got going on, plus the phase 2 that we're hoping to roll out here pretty shortly. Hoping to identify whether it's first and last mile, micromobility, microtransit, what is the service, what is the transportation service that is needed for those areas to fill those gaps, to provide those unmet needs. So that's what I got out of this project, and that's why I hope we continue to move in the future too.
Great. I'm going to kick it to Kim next for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Travis. First of all, I just want to thank Travis for putting this together, and all of our panelists today for providing the information. I think it's really great. My final thought is the legislative session in Missouri has just begun, and many of you have personal stories about the first last mile gap that you're experiencing in your communities, or a wider gap of service. We need for you to tell those stories to your legislators, state and local, state reps and senators, especially the Senate side, the stories about the need for further investment in public transit and how these studies help underscore that need. So I really appreciate everyone joining us today, and thank you for letting me give a final thought, Travis.
Anytime, of course. Alvaro and Luba, final thoughts today. And like Kim said, thank you so much for sharing the results. It's really just fascinating research work that you did.
Couple quick ones on my end. First of all, first last mile is not an urban issue. I mean, that I want everybody to live, especially in a state like Missouri. This is not like a big city issue. This is, across different contexts, whether urban, rural, suburban. It is multimodal as well, just thinking about different options. It's not just, one type of mode. Celebrating the involvement of state DOTs. We have been, working with many DOTs across the country in different projects, and we celebrate that MoDOT is also supporting this. And last but not least, the informational component. There is a technology, there is a partnership component, but there is also the statewide managers, role here that is super critical. So that's another important piece, thinking about the coordination across agencies.
Yeah, I'm in huge agreement with what everyone said, and Travis, thank you for coordinating this. Just two final thoughts on my side, just that context is super important. So understanding the context of the state, the federal environment, but also what is happening in an individual locality. And that collaboration is imperative for the success of any future service.
All right, great. Well, thanks again to each of you for joining us this morning. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar today, so look for that in your inbox, and we'll have a recap that'll include lots of links from everyone. You can access the report and more. Please also look for additional information. We'll be reaching out with our upcoming educational events, and reach out to MPTA with any ideas you have for future webinars, topics you want us to tackle. With that, thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Stay warm out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.